Time to have a look at market news now, starting off in mainland China, where we saw closed a mixed performance rather, and as a result of that, the market closed in that particular front slightly mixed. So it's all about the ongoing Evergrande crisis as markets reopened for trade after a 2-day holiday. And of course, with global markets selling off earlier this week, investors are keeping a close watch on the China markets for any fallout surrounding the embattled developer. Markets in Hong Kong are closed for a holiday. Looking at what's happening in Europe, we are expecting key data releases, which include consumer confidence data for the Eurozone. And we did see a slight indication of a positive open looking at US futures. But to talk to us about everything that is playing out currently, we are joined by our analyst, market watcher, who's going to take us through what's playing out globally as well. That is Patrice Rousseau, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Ashburton Investments. Patrice, thank you so much for your time. I mean, it's quite fascinating what's going on in the world, and I'm curious to know, when you look at your screens and you're talking with your colleagues and even perhaps reading some of the commentary out there, what's the sentiment around global markets right now?
Good afternoon, Nastasia, and to your viewers. Obviously, we've had a few days where the talk was whether we would get to another Lehman moment. If you recall, about more than 10 years ago, ahead of the global financial crisis, the first so-called domino to fall was Lehman Brothers. And now we have this large property developer in China, which was struggling to make its interest payment. But today we hear that they will be servicing their debt, making their payment, and we see markets on the up with the JSE strongly leading the charge, up the top 40 up 1.6%, which is a good news for us.
Right. So we also had financials out of Remgro. What did you make of them?
Very interesting set of results. A lot of restructuring going on within Remgro. If you think about the potential disposal of Distel to Heineken, the restructuring RCL, RMR, and Merchant Insurance will be unbundled, and they will follow its rights already. They said they spoke about disposing of their stake in FirstRand, which is the largest bank on the continent, realizing some $2 billion, and in putting more money in Community Investment Holdings. That's really the holding company which links into dark fiber. A lot going on in this group. But I think the key message is Remgro is refocusing on holdings which are not listed, as opposed to what we saw before, where it had a number of holdings on already listed counters. So now it's going to be quite a unique portfolio of shares. And the results were decent. We look at earnings from a low base up 66%, but the discount to the net asset value, to the value of the assets, still quite high, 35%. So decent results.
What's causing that discount? I mean, is it the fact that they have this high exposure to the listed companies as opposed to the unlisted companies?
Yeah, you spot on. I think the market was quite disappointed that there was nothing unique about the portfolio, special about buying the portfolio when it was dominated by the likes of FirstRand in the portfolio until recently. So you could buy the share directly, whereas now most of the large holdings are unlisted, and it's quite a unique portfolio of industrial shares which have exposure to the South African economy. So I think that will help refocus the minds, and the discount should close.
Central banks are taking center stage this week. We've got the Fed this evening. Tomorrow we've got the South African Reserve Bank. Let's start off with the Fed. I mean, key things that you're hoping, or rather watching out for when Powell speaks.
Yeah, I think at this point in time, everyone will be watching out for the messaging coming from the Fed and the dot plot. I think that some of the data we've seen has been quite weak. If we look at the August payrolls, they just added 235,000 jobs. That was a third of what it was expected. The Delta variant is still raging in the U.S., which means that the sentiment indices are still quite weak, which means that at this point in time, we don't have the same picture we had a few months ago, where the economy was booming and and it was quite clear that the Fed was intent in tapering. I think right now the view would be that the Fed is likely to be more cautious before they taper, which the markets could take quite well.
And the Reserve Bank?
Our own Reserve Bank, I think, if we talk about the situation in South Africa, the inflation picture is looking a bit concerning, jumping to 4%. But I think that given the risks around the globe, it's unlikely that we're going to hike interest rates this year.
So you have tapering talks on both sides, US side, European side. From an investor's point of view, does it matter when they taper, or is it about the fact that they will do it?
I think it does matter because at the end of the day, liquidity, which is what we're talking about, influences asset prices. By tapering quite gently, it means there won't be shocks in the asset markets, and we're just not going to have a collapse. The problem comes if the reserve banks around the world, the central banks around the world, start to remove liquidity too quickly. This might lead to a collapse of asset prices. So far, it's all been very measured, and everyone is looking for indications as to when this liquidity will be withdrawn and whether it's going to be a gradual withdrawing of liquidity, which is a tapering.
What are you keeping an eye on? Because I can imagine, doing what you do as the Chief Investment Officer at Ashburton, there's a lot happening in the world. There's a lot of, data coming through, events happening as well. What's on your radar right now?
Yeah, luckily I've got a team who's on top of that in terms of our global multi-asset team who looks at all the global data. So we can only have our own forecast and see how the market, how the data supports our own forecast. So as we discussed, at this point in time, we find that the picture is still benign. We're not too concerned about the global picture, but obviously we need to remain on top of the data. As my global strategist always says, it's something he looks at every day to make sure that we don't get surprised.
All right, Patrice, thank you so much for your time. That is Patrice Rousseau, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Ashburton Investments. We'll have more business news with my colleague Nzinga Kunta after the break.